Hello and welcome to a special phone-in edition of Chopper's Election podcast. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent. And I'm delighted to say that our guest today is former Tory party leader Iain Duncan Smith. He's come up from Chingford, his constituency, that he's trying to win in next week's election, to answer your calls from Telegraph subscribers. And during the conversation, as you'll hear, we had calls about the election and how it's being run, whether Jeremy Corbyn can become Prime Minister, and what Iain Duncan Smith would do if Corbyn got the keys to number 10. Would he indeed leave the country? If you want to become a Telegraph subscriber, do go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where you can get 30 days free access to all of our Telegraph content. And if you become a subscriber, you'll be notified about how to join these calls. They are exclusive to subscribers. But before we started the phone calls, Iain and I had a quick chat about the election and Jeremy Corbyn. Iain, welcome.
Chris, hi.
So how is the fight going?
Well, it's been constant. I'm in a scruffy order at the moment because I've been walking the streets now for, I suppose, nearly 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks. Somebody said to me, you're averaging about 10 miles a day, which is good, morning, noon and night.
Yeah.
So, it's been a good campaign in the sense that the overall message has been clear. Got to get Brexit done. We've talked about extra spending on health, more police and education. But importantly, the big thing that runs through all of this is that, as I find it going around, Jeremy Corbyn is simply not at all popular. He puts voters off, whether they're Labour voters and, I believe, Conservative voters.
Yeah.
I think they finally got him, and I think many of them just don't like what they see.
How big is your majority?
About 2-4.
So it's in range for Labour, they would say, would they?
Yeah, Labour's campaigning up there, but we're having a much better campaign and a much better feel than in 2017. 2017 was a peculiar election. Many, myself included, didn't think we should have fought the election. We should have just got on with it, delivered Brexit. It then delivered a very poor campaign, wasn't ready for it, and we ended up with no overall majority, which has been the cause, I'm afraid, of the meandering and dither and delay, as Boris would say.
Yeah.
And that then means, in essence, that we've been unable to get the Brexit vote done. We've been unable to deliver on it. Labour's Nats and the Liberals have done everything they can to block us, and Boris Johnson was right finally to say enough's enough. The British people voted. They were told we would deliver on it. We have to deliver on it. We now need a majority. So that message resonates. People get it, I think. This is what's different about 2017 is 2017 people can understand why we're having an election.
Yes.
This
There's a
time
reason
round,
to have it.
they actually have a very clear reason.
Do you worry about the polls narrowing? I mean, what appears to be happening is the Brexit Party is going now down to 3% in the polls. The Tories have benefited, but the Lib Dem support is soft, and Labour's getting a lot of those supporters.
Well, they're getting some of them. My general sense is, though, it is different. The reality is that I think a lot of the Labour vote is very soft at the moment, because you do meet a lot of Labour voters who've voted Labour all their lives, a bit like Ian Austin, who no longer think that this is their party. They think it's deserted them on many fronts, not least of which is Brexit. Their position over Brexit is unsustainable. You have a man who says he wants to be Prime Minister, but decides that their policy is to go back, renegotiate with the European Union, making it clear to the European Union at the end of it, they're going to vote against it anyway. And he himself is going to express no opinion whatsoever. So how can you negotiate with a man that has no opinion about the outcome? I mean, it's ridiculous. So the European Union will just say, oh, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. You have to accept everything, but you just won't have a vote in the council. And so what are Labour going to say? Okay, because they don't want to vote for it anyway. And so then they will make the worst case possible for leaving the European Union, and end up with something which the British public either won't vote for at all or will have to vote against. I mean, it's a complete stitch-up.
So the offering is certainty against lack of certainty.
Yeah, drift, delay, more anger, and people feeling disenfranchised. And at the end of it all, a complete stitch-up, because the one question that will not be on any ballot paper under Labour is leave. All you'll have is a messy deal, which won't work, and an option to stay. And that means that all those 17.4 million people will have been utterly betrayed. And the one thing I do pick up from people who did vote Remain is very many of them now say, we have to get it done. We accept, we didn't win the vote. We can't meander on any longer. What's damaging is the failure to make a decision, as Boris says. And the other bit is, if Corbyn comes in, it'll be delay, dither, and economic collapse. That's a great soup of a mess that we're going to have if he gets elected.
And we're going towards the character of Jeremy Corbyn in his final few days, aren't we, I think?
Well, I think people have got it. I don't think there's any question. I think we need to keep on making the focus Mr. Corbyn, because it's quite clear. And when you get people like Len McCluskey and candidates accepting that they don't talk about Jeremy Corbyn on the doorstep because he's deeply unpopular, and these are Labour candidates, you really understand that there is a problem. The man that might be Prime Minister, and it is a real threat that he may yet scrape through, even in a hung parliament with the largest party. They're going to get a man who, frankly, on every issue has been essentially wrong. And what worries me, not just on the economy, I mean, their spending plans are so catastrophic that they would bust the economy. You'll see a flight of money out of this place within 2 seconds. And ordinary people will pay, as papers have now pointed out, things like the marriage tax allowance, which was aimed at people in poor,
only a few
lower
pounds,
incomes.
though, Ian. Not a lot of money.
This is only what you're just beginning to discover now. You know very well every Labour government cannot find the tax money, and it comes a raiding. People with houses, they want a garden tax. They haven't talked about that. They're going to separately tax your gardens from you. It just begins. And as they can't raise, as the IRFS said, the £90 billion in the immediate tax burden, which they've said is simply incredible, they're going to have to find it from somewhere. So they're going to be hunting down the quotes, wealthy people will become less wealthy, and we will see exactly what happens.
Your experience in Chingford of the Labour fight, it's got quite dirty recently against you and your offices.
Yeah, not just me. I've looked around the country, and in many, many Conservative, fights that are going on, I think it's this momentum crowd. Labour seems to shrug their shoulders at this and pretend it's nothing to do with them because they're a different organisation. But they're all backing and supporting Labour candidates, particularly Corbynista candidates. And what's happened is the other day we had our offices spray painted with all sorts of graffiti against us. Yeah. I posted it on my Twitter and on my Facebook page. I think about 1.2 million people then read what was on my Twitter page. And at about 4 o'clock, suddenly the nasties moved in on it and attacked the people on the site. They called them mad, they should be shot, they should be burned. It went on like this. We had to report all this to the police in the end.
What kind of language was it?
It was vile. It was vile language.
Can't say it on air?
But it was things like, more's coming, you're going to get yours, next time it's petrol, we're going to burn the building down, you should have been hanged, you lot should be shot. It's all this stuff going on. These were direct threats.
Daubed on the wall.
Daubed on the wall were about, us being murderers and everything else, which they do all the time. But this gave them license once on the internet to just heap the abuse on it. And we've handed it all.
And it's phone calls and letters.
Yeah, before the election began, I had a death threat. We've had threats of violence that have been investigated by the police. I think this is the nastiest election that I can recall in 27 years, I have to tell you. I don't think I'm alone in that, by the way. Maybe it's desperation, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe the momentum crowd, maybe Labour are so desperate they want to frighten Conservatives out of the way. They're not going to do it. They can say what they like, even try what they like, or do what they like. Democracy demands that we stand up to them, and I'm going to stand up to them. Difficult to move.
Is it normal Labour people or is it this far left and coming into the area to do it?
Well, you don't know because they all, and we think, by the way, they used avatars too on these things. We're beginning to see bots.
Lots of fake accounts.
Yeah, so one man or one woman might create 10, 15 fake accounts. You can spot them because you begin to look too ordered, too smart, too samey in their comments, and then we think there may even be bots being involved by Momentum now, which is automatic robotic abuse, which comes out. And the sole purpose of it is drive the good people off the net, make them fear being on there, make them hate the abuse, and then drive them off. That's their view.
And do you draw a line from this behaviour you're seeing back to the leadership, or do you think they don't know what's going on, or what's going on?
I can't, you'll have to ask them that question, but all I know is that it's aimed in one direction, at one group of people, Conservatives, by people who are ideologically, and by ideology I mean ideologically, tight with the Labour leadership. So all I can say is they need to, they come out and they do the standard kind of, how terrible, but they must know somehow who these people are, and I think it's time that they started sacking people and getting them out of their party. The party is, I think, infiltrated by these nasty
and it's not really dealing with it at all as far as you can make out.
No, actually it has, it has wonderfully the opposite effect. Make my day, because that's all I'm saying, because they just, people, decent, reasonable people, whether they vote Labour or Conservative, they hate this kind of stuff. They really do. I've had, knocking on doors, lots of people say to me, I'm really sorry to hear about this. Even somebody the other day who said, I normally vote Labour, but, honestly, I've been reading about this abuse and I really don't like it. People don't like it. So this is backfiring on them big time.
Well, I'm sure, and Labour would, of course, be appalled by what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what they say.
To respond to it. The offering from Labour is quite interesting. It is a complete overhaul. I mean, the Westminster, where you and I have worked for the past 3 years since the referendum, had a near nervous breakdown about Brexit. Well, what Labour are offering is just literally tipping up the consulting table if we're in a psychiatrist's chair.
Actually, what they're offering is the room next door marked, we tried this in the 1970s and it bust Britain. But hey, let's have another run round this one because, owning all the main points of industry, nationalising everything, running it, paying for that at cheap rates, which kills all the pension funds, kills the companies that have set up the whole energy and innovativeness of British industry. That's where they want to go, back to the Michael Foot days. Now, many people are too young to remember that, but I'm old enough to remember that nationalised industries on the scale that they had didn't work. From the railways right the way through to British Airways were all nationalised.
So history repeats itself because no one listens the first time.
There is an old rule in politics, which is no argument is ever won forever. And that's true.
But are the Tories not making that argument properly? The Norman Lamont wrote for us last week saying he didn't feel there's enough Tory attack dog pushing back at the Labour.
There has been. I thought Sajid Javid did a very good job on them a couple of weeks ago, and I think you'll see more of that in the next week, which is really a refocus on what this is all about. And what's interesting about the Labour campaign is they've tried to confuse everybody. So they did a manifesto launch, and they said that was fully costed, and that led the IFS to say this is simply not credible. And then since then, they've added to that. So they had a pledge of 58 billion to try and pay back apparently what people who were women who were
waspy women
raised to the pension age level with them, which by the way came off a European Court of Justice judgment that forced the then Labour government to equalise. So for those, many of them might say, oh, well, we're pro-Europe. My answer is, well, it was Europe that drove us in that direction in the first place. So that's a 58 billion plus, and now they've gone on. And the other one, which is really interesting, is the whole issue of broadband and superfast broadband. And they didn't think this one through at all, because there you have their commitment now to take this all over, thinking they're just going to be dealing with a little bit of BT OpenReach. Well, in actual fact, there's all the other companies that are involved in this. And the trick is...
And it stops their investment straight away.
Completely.
Why would you invest if you weren't...
Yeah. And what about the pension funds that are already invested in them? And here's the other problem. When they said, oh, we'll pay for this with gilts, with government bonds, well, we know very well that when it comes to do that, they may end up paying at only 20% of value per the bond, which means it will be an absolute disaster for those companies. They will be under market value when eventually taken over.
Don't you think they're pitching into a group of people who may not have done very well in the past 9 years, can't get on the housing ladder, seen their salary rate go up less than the cost of living, and it's 5 more years of the Tories, had 9 years of them, and how has it helped me?
Well,
I think those younger people are...
But I think Boris Johnson has dealt with this. The fact is that we know we had to get the economy straight. It's worth remembering that, and this is not done enough, that when we walked through the door in 2010, the economy has had the biggest deficit and the biggest collapse, bigger than in the Great Depression in the 1930s. Our economy was in a worse state, and that is because the previous Labour government had gone on an enormous spending spree. Welfare payments, for example, had risen by 60% a year under the last Labour government. Money was being chucked at them, borrowing was rising through the roof. We had the biggest deficit and the biggest growing debt level that we'd had. Getting that under control was necessary. Otherwise, we'd have been bussed back to 1979, where the IMF had to walk in and bail us out. And that was the only time in history when any government has actually cut, in real terms, the NHS spending, was under a Labour government in 79 because they had bust the country. Now, my point is, yes, we're in a position now with a stable economy. We have headroom in the economy to reinvest now and reinvest carefully in the NHS, that extra 34 billion that's going in. In my case, I have a hospital which is going to get 400 million to rebuild, which I've campaigned for. But also, you've got, in the case of policing, we know now we can afford to put more police on the street, but they've got to be more effective, so stop and search. and education is going to get more money into the budget. So we can now start to close down the idea that the next 5 years is going to be about reduction. It's not. It's about reinvestment in infrastructure, in broadband, and in
What would you do differently
services.
if you were Boris Johnson? You were a Conservative leader back in the day. What would you do now if you were leading the party? Everything he's doing, you'd do.
I asked him to do this, and he's
You
come
were chairman
out,
of the campaign?
He's come very close to everything that I wanted. I wanted, for example, to make sure that the key investments were made, whether it's in the changes to welfare, right the way through to education, and importantly, a commitment to proper infrastructure investment. Because one of the things that the Centre for Social Justice, which I set up, found, we did a report on what was the real problem in Britain. And the real problem is that we're too London and South East England centric. So we have in London and the southeast of England the highest levels of income, but also the levels of productivity in the whole of Western Europe. But if you go outside London and the southeast, no other region of the UK meets the average for the whole of the UK in productivity. So Boris Johnson is doing the right thing in the sense saying now we've got to start investing much more in things like broadband, railway links, bypasses, road links, in areas like the Midlands, the North, and in parts of Wales and things like that. And this is the big drive now. We can borrow to invest in those areas, but you still got to make sure that debt as a proportion of GDP falls, otherwise you lose control of it. So that's what I call sensible investment, the right investment, and that will help people's lives.
But do you agree with Boris Johnson not to say we will leave with a deal by the end of next year and no deal is off the table?
No, he's right to do this because what we're saying is we have a deal now to get the exit bit done,
End of January? With a majority?
And then what happens? We get that done. We have a majority. We drive those negotiations.
11 months, so Iain Duncan Smith. Is that possible?
Yeah, it is. It's very possible because they've been doing a lot of work on this already. I mean, most of the civil service have been trying to scope what's in the trade position. My only position would be that we need now to reach outside the civil service to bring in the smartest lawyers. When we used to do privatisation, we used to reach out to all these really brilliant brains that earned a living getting it right around the business, and we need to bring them in to do that negotiation for us because now trade and sovereignty come together, and it's critical. Settle sovereignty first, trade second.
This time next week, Iain Duncan Smith, tomorrow, the country goes to the polls. What's your forecast?
I don't forecast, and you'll understand why, because my general view is that if I forecast too well, people get complacent. If I forecast too bad, then people say, oh, look, it's all very depressing. My view is that every single voter now needs to make this choice. It's a simple choice. Who do you want on Friday to be running the country? And there is only one of two people that can be picked on this. One is Boris Johnson, who I think is upbeat, clear, absolutely determined to make the most of a great country, or a man like Jeremy Corbyn, who has, by and large, never really liked or approved of his country in almost everything that's been done. And I was serving on the streets of Northern Ireland, trying to protect the public up there, and I lost a good friend killed in Northern Ireland. For me, it was very difficult because during those days, Jeremy Corbyn and others wanted us to be taken out of Northern Ireland and campaigned, with the Sinn Féin to get that done. And I think had that happened at the time, it would have been an utter disaster. So the answer is to us, people who believe in Britain is what you want running the country, not people who wish it was another country.
And you think he hates this country, do you?
I think, I just get furious because he seems to side so often with others. I mean, look what happened when the Schiphol murder attempts were taking place and the Salisbury attacks. His equivocal statement in House of Commons was really very poor.
But Barry Gardiner would say that he's on the right side of history over Iraq and questioning bombings that the country has done over the past 30 years. And
hang on, it depends what you mean by on the right side of history. The reality is, had we not in Northern Ireland been so clear that we actually rendered the IRA almost unable to operate, that they came to the peace table finally, then we wouldn't have got a settlement, which we had eventually, a balanced settlement, the Good Friday Agreement. Had we just pulled the troops out, as he wanted in Northern Ireland, you would have actually seen a very devastating war take place there, and we avoided that. So he's not been right.
Iain Duncan Smith, it's so good to hear from you on Chopper's Election podcast, Phone In. Well, phone IDS will now carry on with listeners phoning in. So if you want to ask a question, please follow the operator's instructions and press *6, then press 1 to join the question queue. Now, do you have our first question, please? Hello, who are you, please, sir?
Hello, it's Mike. I'm calling from the Wirral.
Hi, Mike. You're through to Call IDS. Oh, Mike, your question first, please.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to apologise to Iain Duncan Smith because when I was a naive student at Durham University, he came to visit and I was very rude to him. So I really, really want to apologise for that.
No problem at all.
Well, first of all, I hope you feel that it's on topic. I don't know whether you'd agree with me. I think you probably would. I think that basically the Conservative Party made a disastrous appointment there of Theresa May as Prime Minister, and that's why the last 3 years have been so devastating and such a mess. Would you agree with that? The whole fact that Jeremy Corbyn is even in contention, for example, as Prime Minister, because really before she called the 2017 election, he was finished, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think, however, it's difficult because I personally thought that David Cameron should have stuck around, having done the referendum and seen the next bit through. So I agree. I was a little surprised when he stepped down the day after the vote. But having said that, we were left then in the position of having to pick somebody reasonably quickly, and I think we should have gone to a proper contest in the country because that would have...
And Andrew Leadsom against Theresa May.
Yeah, something like that, and I think that all then folded up, and that was a great pity. Look, to be fair to Theresa, she did her very best, but the problem is that the decision that went wrong was the 2017 election. We should never have had that. I was one of those that said, don't call it. Nobody wants it. Brenda of Bristol was quite right. I agreed with her. We just had a really bruising referendum where families were divided. Nobody wanted to go back to the polls again. And I think it was a big mistake to do it. We didn't need to. We had a majority. We could have got the Brexit stuff done, I think, in the next 12 months. Then we could have asked the question. So the last 2 years following that has been, I'm afraid, a product of that bad decision. But look, politicians make decisions. Sometimes they're not great. But Theresa is a very decent person, and she has always dedicated herself to her country.
Do you think, to follow Mike's question now, hasn't the impasse created the condition to get a deal where both sides are giving a bit? It seems like a fair deal. Both sides are contributing.
Yes, I think at some point we had to have a compromise. The problem was I think the original proposals were on the table were not really a compromise. They were pretty much a one-way street for the European Union. Since then, the European Union's had to back down a bit, give, and we might have something now that gets us through, but the next phase is the critical phase.
Mike, before you go, do you want to say what you told Iain Duncan Smith 30 years ago? He might remember what you called him.
No, I wouldn't. I couldn't possibly.
It's too impolite.
You know what you're like when you're an 18-year-old student. You think you know everything, and then you're a mad lefty, and you say all sorts of things. So I do apologise for that.
Yeah,
it's what Churchill said. If you're not young, you're a socialist, and you have a heart. But if you're not a conservative, when you grow up,
I think you're wonderful now, anyway, Iain.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you,
Mike. Thank you, and please do hang up when you finish speaking. You're going to get to the next call. Next caller, please. Hello there.
Hello.
Hi.
It's Adrian from Stroud in a very beautiful, sunny Gloucestershire.
Adrian, you're through to Call IDS on Chopper's Election podcast. What's your question for Iain Duncan Smith?
Yeah, good afternoon, gentlemen. I don't know if anybody looks at weather forecasts and takes an interest, but there is an increasing chance of some bad weather for particularly the northern half of England coming in next week, just in time for the election. I'm assuming this would affect turnout, and coupled with general voter apathy. Is Iain concerned that despite the best laid plans, the good old British weather could scupper Boris's chances of getting back to number 10? Is it going to help Labour more than the Tories?
Okay, I got it.
Will it help neither?
Iain.
Adrian, nice to hear from you.
Hi.
This is the question which no politician can ever answer, because every time I have this discussion, somebody says, it's going to be bad weather. That's got to be good for us as Conservatives. And somebody else says, no. Actually, it's bad for us. So the honest truth is nobody knows. My view is, however, you've got to take the mood. I think the mood in this election is much stronger. People know what they're voting for. They are at decision time. Two big decisions. One decision is, are we going to get Brexit done? You have to make that decision. One side says, let's get it done immediately. The other side says delay and prevarication and dither. And the second big decision is, who do you want to govern? And that's really the choice between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. And I think those are interlinked with each other. So I think the motivation to go out and vote this time round will be high. I would make one small prediction is I think it certainly won't be lower than 2017. I think the turnout may even be higher.
Adding on to what Adrian said there, Iain, though, is it the case that Tories don't like voting in the dark because some of them are older, they might chip over? Or Labour voters don't like the rain because they haven't got cars? These are all ideas going back in the past, aren't they?
I don't know that really works, because I think a lot of these concepts were 20 or 30 years old now. Lots and lots of people have got cars, got transport, access to transport. No, my view is I can't see that the weather will balance it one way or the other. What I do think is I'm picking up a real clarity from people that they have to make a decision. Yeah. So when you get somebody who's an undecided, they're undecided but they will vote because they know they have to make that decision.
Okay, Adrian, thank you so much. Our next caller, please.
Hi, I'm Linda Gilbert.
Hi, Linda.
Very sore throat. We're up in Dumfries.
Oh, hello, Linda. Hi. You're through to Call IDS on Chopper's Election Podcast. What's your question, please?
Yeah, right, okay. If I can talk that long. My main concern is we've got Alistair Jack, who's done a good job.
Yep.
But his office is absolutely useless. We haven't had an election campaign. We've never seen anyone, never been anywhere. So how can we vote if the Tories can't get out? I mean, we are semi-rural. We're not sort of stuck on top of Criffel, which is a couple of thousand feet high. We're only 2 miles out of town, 3 miles out of town. There's been no election. We've had SNP. We've even had Lib Dems. Emailed Alistair Jack's office, said, oh, come on, you're going to get out here.
Okay, so he's not here to defend himself, but on the wide...
No, he's not.
And Ian's not leader of the party, so he can't really answer for Alistair Jack. But do you think the Tories aren't fighting hard enough in Scotland? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I actually think Boris Johnson's let us down in Scotland. Ruth Davidson did a great job 2 years ago, turning round. We only had one MP in Scotland 2 years ago.
Okay. Iain Duncan Smith, are the Tories fighting hard enough in Scotland? It's vital they don't lose those 13 seats in 2017 to get the majority.
I can't comment, obviously, directly on Alistair Jack's constituency, but bear in mind that Alistair has a pan-government role in this. So he is one of those heading up the Scottish campaign. So he's probably all over Scotland now campaigning. As I understand it in Scotland, the reality is that the big choices are intertwined. So the arguments about Brexit, all the arguments about whether or not you should back a nationalist cry for another referendum on independence of Scotland from the United Kingdom. And I think, as I see it at the moment, the issue around another referendum is a big polarising choice. And the Conservatives are definitely the only party of a major size, anyway, that is the ones opposing that second referendum
in
for
Scotland.
Independence in Scotland. And so the big question is that, and although I saw the other day that that Mrs. Sturgeon got a very hard time over her running of the domestic economy in Scotland and health, etc., where the outcomes in many senses are worse than they are now in England. So these are big issues, but I can't comment obviously on your constituency. I will certainly relay your comments to Alistair Jack to make sure that he's aware.
No, it's not Alistair Jack. I just think his office needs a good shake-up.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll take it up with him.
I'll definitely take it up with him, don't worry.
Thank you so much. Our next call, please.
Hello, Ian. It's Stephen from Fulham. My point I would like to make is that there seems to be an absence of anything to do with the House of Lords reform or boundary changes in the manifesto. Why is this?
Well, the boundary changes proposal is already in. So the statement is there. We now have to decide whether we're going to vote on it. With respect, I don't think it's a big issue for the public. I think the issues for the public are not to do with the way that Parliament works. I think that's something that we'd have to take up. With regards to law reform, it's been a rolling debate that's been going on.
Sorry, House of Lords reform.
That's exactly right. That's what I'm saying. Lords reform, House of Lords reform. It's been a rolling debate. There are lots of different opinions on it, and I'm very happy for us to conduct that debate. But I think in terms of the election, I really think we have to focus on the issues that I think are the ones most uppermost in people's minds, and those are the issue. The number one fundamental reason for calling the election is that without a majority, we cannot get the Brexit issue done. We can't get out. We meander along, and that damages the economy. And the other one is this threat, as I say, of Jeremy Corbyn when it comes to the economy and also when it comes to the issue of Brexit. Those are the very big single issues. Around that, the issues around health, policing and education are big, and we've made some very significant...
But Ian, on the issue of boundary reform, if you did cut the numbers of seats to 650 to 600, it would balance it more in the Tories' favour, wouldn't it?
Yes, there's no question. There's no question, and you are right in pointing this out, that there are many, many Labour MPs sitting in seats where, in some cases, they're down to 40,000 voters. And if you compare that to other seats like mine, it's 63, and some others, it's over 70,000.
So it's equalising to around.
Equalising that is long overdue, and of course Labour has blocked that, and some my colleagues don't want it to happen. So it's however there, that is ready to go. It's just a matter of whether or not Parliament can now be persuaded to vote for it and get it through. But certainly that work has all been done. I mean, I put in my area towards that, and they've come back.
It was a big operation that the Commission did on that.
Huge operation. It's sitting there now, and I think I personally think we should get on with it. But, I'm only one voice in this.
Good. Okay, next question, please.
Hello. My name's Jennifer from Cambridgeshire.
Hi, Jennifer. What's your question for IDS?
Well, you've been talking about political process a lot, but out there are 2.5 million rental accommodation providers. And why do all three major parties treat them not as small businesses with normal moral compass, but as evil beings, and they want to ruin our livelihoods and retirement provision? Sadly, including the Conservative Party, who've done a lot of bad things. And I've always voted Conservative, and I've always thought of Conservatives as a party for small businesses and for people who want to provide for themselves.
Yes, I understand fully the problem here, and I know that some of the regulations. One of the big issues for people who have rental property they rent out is the now very onerous level of regulation that needs to take place. Also, the problem over relief on mortgage relief, which was taken away from those renting. I understand that's raised the cost. I have urged, obviously, the government, when they get back, to have a serious look at this now, because whilst one of the reasons given was that, well, if we have less buy-to-let, we have more chance for people to buy properties themselves. And there is some element of truth in that. But my general view is that we need rental property because it's in high demand at the moment, and some people don't want to buy, they want to rent. And also in terms of the social sector, that is to say those who will be renting using local housing allowance, we desperately need to make sure that there are properties available for them to rent. So I think you're right in a sense that we do certainly need to review this and make sure that we don't now tip the balance so that it appears that we are trying to make life very difficult for those who have houses and flats that they want to rent. So that is definitely something I've been taking forward and we've looked at.
Withdraw from
the
sector.
Well, my view is that we need the sector, and there are big question marks about the level of regulation that we've now imposed. But it's something I know Boris Johnson wants to look at when he gets back into power.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you so much for calling in. Our next question, please.
Hello, my name is Ali McDonald from Cambridgeshire.
Hi, Ali.
Hi, I'm director of a business, and if I make false claims about my business in terms of budgets, future projections, etc., I can essentially go to prison. Do we not think it's time that cabinet ministers making false claims should face the same consequences to stop all this nonsense that's being claimed constantly?
Okay, and that goes for both. That's not just Brexit and other areas on the Tory side, it's also on Labour's side. If you say something that's wrong in politics, you should face criminal sanction, Iain Duncan Smith.
It's certainly what happens now is there's a much closer checking of what people actually say and asking whether that is wholly correct or incorrect or partially correct. And that goes on every single day now. So I think the parties are now much, much more determined to make sure they get their facts right. And for the most part during this election, I think that's been pretty much close to the mark. I think that you have the National Stats Authority. They're very quick on government to say whether they've done right or wrong, and on the opposition too. And they will go through everything with a fine comb. Then you've got a whole series of people that are supposed to be independent from full fact right the way through to other fact-checking groups. So you get that immediately if somebody says something which is clearly wrong. So there's a difference between somebody saying something which they believe to be right, but later on the authority says, well, actually, it's not exactly as you say it is. And others who say, knowing full well that this is incorrect, and say it when the facts are already out there and it is known that this is wholly incorrect. That is a different matter.
And Iain, wouldn't you say that if you're on your guard against prosecution by the courts, it would chill down debate? I mean, we want to have a free speech political system, don't we? We want to say what you want to say.
Yes, but I mean, how far do you take that? Because somebody says something in a debate in public, may not be a politician, and they say something which they firmly believe, turns out later that's not correct. You arrest them for saying that, because that then runs counter to freedom of speech. What you have to do, I think, is to call it out and to make it clear. And if somebody gets a reputation for saying stuff consistently that is wrong, then they will never be believed. And actually, to be quite frank, the British public has a healthy skepticism about pretty much anything that politicians say these days. And so I think just saying it's not like back in the 1960s or something. It's not just saying, oh, that's correct, and then everyone says, oh, well, the Prime Minister said that's correct, so it must be. They wait to see whether or not it turns out to be correct. So I think it's very important that a one statement doesn't actually have any purchase.
Okay. Ali, thank you so much. Our next question, please.
Oh, hello. Yes, my name's Colin. I'm phoning from Worcester.
Hi, Colin from Worcester. You're through to IDS, Call IDS on Choppers Election Podcast. What's your question for Iain?
When Theresa May was Prime Minister, one of the criticisms was made of her was that her approach to the Brexit negotiations was, if you like, for age limitation. You know, it would portray that she was a Remainer, and therefore she didn't have, the positive spirit to a successful Brexit negotiation. The manifesto pledge of getting Brexit done, and the way that is described in the manifesto, does smack to me a little bit of damage limitation. In other words, you get Brexit done, and then we can get on with the priorities of the British people, NHS, etc. That's what the manifesto actually says. It doesn't, to me, convey the positive aspects that Brexit supposedly can deliver for the country over the next period.
Colin, I got it. Iain Duncan Smith.
It's a rather negative. I can understand the reason why it's pitched that way, but it doesn't hang together with the rather positive view of Brexit that I was hoping would come out.
Iain Duncan Smith, more sunlit uplands required.
Yeah, no, there is some truth. There is some truth in this comment. Yeah, of course, there's always a fine balance. But let me just take you back. The reason why we're having this election is because Parliament has been literally locked down because we haven't a majority, can't get anything done. And that means that has affected a lot of what we would need to do domestically to sort things out. So the reason why Boris Johnson has gone clearly for the number one top-line message, which is get Brexit done, is because I think that is the prevailing mood of the public, because that covers those who want to leave and those who had voted Remain, but now recognise it's an imperative we clear the air on this and get it done. So it covers both sides. The second bit is he does, however, go very positive when he's pressed about it. He always says, and I say the same, I'm a massive optimist about the UK. I think the UK is on the cusp of a brilliant rise again, both intellectually and in terms of industry. I think the Brexit vote was a cry for that independence and that ability to be able to shape our own world here in the UK in the way that we like it best, and to put ourselves back in that sort of free trading, buccaneering mode that we are natural to, which is the UK. After all this time in the EU in 40 years, we still are the only country that exports more outside of the EU than we do into the EU, and that is a unique point.
But do you think, Iain Duncan Smith, if you win a majority next week, then with that will become the optimism of Brexit? Because until that point, it's been a bit of a crouch, isn't it?
Well, you can understand why, because it's very difficult to be optimistic and upbeat when the whole time you fail to get the delivery of what people voted for. So you are kind of defensive because you're trying to get stuff through and the other side are blocking it. But once we get elected, if we get that majority, and we need that majority, otherwise we won't end up being able to deliver Brexit. Once we get that done, then we are in the ability to shape our future, and the EU will know we're in a much stronger negotiating position on trade once we have that majority. So now the language can be clearly all about optimism, all about belief, and all about hope for this country, which, by the way, I do think is the greatest country on earth, and always have done, always will do. It's full of the greatest people.
Yeah. And would you watch the Queen's speech on Christmas Day, Iain Duncan Smith? Jeremy Corbyn is not sure he does.
Well, I always watch the Queen's speech on Christmas Day. My problem is my family might be dividing up this Christmas to go to different locations, as I've got a daughter who lives over in Canada, but we can watch it on the internet.
Of course. Right, next question, please.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hello, it's John from Middlesex.
Hi, John. You're through to Call IDS. What's your question for Iain Duncan Smith?
Oh, hello. Oh, yes, thank you. Hello, Iain. Just a question for you, slightly different topic, but fits in with some of the other subjects earlier. We heard last week that a lot of massive increase in new registrations for voting, which people said is a big number of young people and students. And there was an assumption in the media that, well, they'll all vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
We've also heard that, welfares go up, so Jeremy Corbyn says, oh, that's okay, we'll reduce them by 30%.
From the motorway budget.
But Boris says that we can't pay everything. So unfortunately, the ladies who are disadvantaged by the pension change, they won't get it. And he goes, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll pay that in full. Now, all of these promises we know are unaffordable. They're not costed into the manifesto. They've all just been plucked out of the air and thrown out there. What I'd like to know is how, or can the Conservatives pitch more vigorously to demonstrate to the British public that these are exactly what they are, which are just, they're trying to buy the votes, and they're not real promises, and actually that they're not sustainable. And getting a free education doesn't make the country better. There are prices for everything.
John, thank you. Iain Duncan Smith, punch back harder, he's saying.
Yeah, John, the number of points you raised there. Let's deal first of all with voter registration. You're right, there is a lazy assumption amongst particularly the broadcast media, I think, that a young person will vote for Corbyn. I have to tell you, that's not my finding. And the second thing is, if you look at the figures for the new registrations, at first they were all indicating it's all young people. In fact, a third of the registrations are people below the age of 25, one third. The rest are people in their 30s and 40s, and then there's another group above 60. So it's a more balanced registration that you might have otherwise understood. But these lazy assumptions, I'm afraid, where some of the broadcast media has been for a while about this, but they're wrong. And the reality is that people will make choices about their future. There are plenty of young people who wanted to vote for Brexit, for example, and get discounted and bullied in many senses in some of the institutions, because many of those who have sat in these institutions don't want to leave. And so the result is you have to watch what you say. So I think many people out there are very quiet about what they did and what they believe in when it comes to Brexit, but actually will vote in accordance with their strong-held beliefs. The second element of you're right about Labour's policy, and I believe that Sajid Javid is ready to have another go. Bear in mind that what they've now done is they had a manifesto which promised most of the earth to anybody that wanted it, and it was badly costed and led to the IFS saying this was simply incredible. It was not likely to be able to raise these taxes. Since then, they've decided, because it didn't land particularly well, they're going to segment the British public into different interest groups. And you talked a bit about them. So they say to WASPy Women, here's 58 billion more, by the way, on top of the budget for you. And then they go to other groups. One by one, they pick them off, and then they start saying, well, what is your problem? Let's now fund it. The problem is we now need to round that all up and make it very clear that the manifesto was only the first part of a massive and expensive explosion of money that they will have to raise in taxation and borrowing. And this is on a scale never seen before in the United Kingdom. And it will bust us. But I think that point, you're right, has to be made again, because in a 5-week campaign, although we made that point early on, in the first 2 weeks, we now need to make it again. And I believe that's exactly what will happen. And I keep saying this, the threat of Jeremy Corbyn in almost every sphere that matters, whether it's defence and security, whether it's money in the budget and the second phase of the budget that they keep saying they're going to spend money on, or whether it's on Brexit, is palpable and is really cutting through.
But John, maybe saying, and forgive me for summarising it, John, but are you saying there that there's not enough pushback against the magic money tree, which Labour appears to have found in some parts? I mean, do you not think Iain Duncan Smith needs to be more punching back by attack dogs in the party?
Well, we will. We did it at the beginning. There's always a period in the middle where you go on to other subjects. But now this is the key message for the next 7 days, which is, do you want to wake up on Friday morning, led by Jeremy Corbyn, a government that will bankrupt Britain because the spending plans it has will literally be on a scale we've never seen before, and Brexit simply won't get done. So the choice is yours.
John, thank you so much. Our next question, please.
It's Alistair McMillan from Port Glasgow.
Hi, Alistair. You're through to Call IDS. Please, your question, please.
I find it very frustrating. Conservatives, there's this whole business about young people, but young people are being sold a complete pup by the Labour Party. Traditionally, through inheritance, those young people work hard, and then they will obviously get an inheritance as their parents drop off their perch, as we all do at some point. But now that's all going to be ripped away from them with Labour's new plans for this new tax, which will only allow them to pass on a very, very small, or allow a very small amount to be passed on. And this doesn't seem to be mentioned at all. Equally, the Conservatives have not, there's been no trumpeting of the national insurance threshold rising at all to counter the Labour tax plans. And I just find that I know Iain says that Sajid Javid has been very good at explaining it, but that was some time ago. And it has to be, you have to keep reminding people that this is just cloud cuckoo land economics that are coming out of Labour and McDonnell. It's unbelievable. I run a business here, and quite frankly, I'm bloody terrified of next week because all this tactical voting and everything, it is, up here in Scotland, I've had tactical vote. I've been told to vote Labour in one place, just keep the SNP out. I'm told to vote Conservative somewhere else for Brexit. And, everybody's getting bombarded by this stuff. And up here in particular, the people are terrified of the SNP.
What's your advice?
Anything.
Iain Duncan Smith, what's your advice for Alistair? Well, tactical voting,
don't get involved in tactical voting. Vote for the party.
I'm not going to, don't worry.
Yeah. But on your other points, though, which are all very viable, you're quite right. And I promise you, I've been talking to them now. This next 7 days is literally about the threat that is posed to the economy, to businesses like yours. We do need, you're quite right, we must talk more about raising of the national insurance threshold, which will help families up and down the land. There's no question about that. I mean, Labour's plans for corporation tax, their way in which they want to grab more money when people die, and their hatred of anything being inherited or passed on. Young people, like everybody else, they get enthused by the idea of some kind of nirvana where, that it can all be done. It's very simple, that you just need to take over things and the government runs them better. The trouble is, I suspect you, and certainly I, can remember when government did just that in the UK, and it was a bleak world indeed. The economy was bust, trains didn't run on time, they never did. The trade unions literally camped out in Downing Street telling the Prime Minister what to do. They were incredibly powerful. And Britain was known as the sick man of Europe, with the highest number of days lost through strikes in the whole of the developed world. Now, this was the record of what Mr. Corbyn is designing for Britain right now. Now, it's no good people like me saying, well, that's what it was like. They'll all say, oh, well, but it's different now. It's not. But we have to make the argument why free enterprise offers young people the greatest hope for their futures than anything I know.
I can just cut in. Right, sorry, if I can just cut in. I think it's important. You have to point out to them that they will be paying for it.
Yes,
there may be no university fees, but they will be paying for it. They're the higher taxpayers of the future. And 80,000 quid sounds a lot when it's banded around, but look at it net. 54,000. That's not rich if you've got to pay a mortgage for £1 million place because it's about or 500,000 to buy a house in the middle of somewhere in London because that's where your job is.
But you and I both know that doesn't stop there either, because it will be people on lower incomes that will be forking out, because as the RFS said, and this has to be said again and again and again, their tax plans for what they said are higher earners are not credible. They will not get those taxes. So it is a real threat.
If I can butt in now, Alistair and Iain Duncan Smith, do you think then the Tories need to make the case that the Tories can say to young people, it's your money, you spend it as you see fit? Because the Labour offer is the state will do it for you because you can't do it for yourself. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I agree.
It's
a very arrogant approach.
I come back to the point I made earlier. No political argument is ever made forever. In other words, you have to remake the case again and again. And we have to remake the case, which I believe in fundamentally, that private enterprise is absolutely critical for the nature of what people earn and for their futures in a country. And it is private enterprise, and it's the reforms that Mrs. Thatcher made to make that flexible economy that actually driven us the biggest uplift in work, the smallest and lowest number of unemployed, the highest number of employed people anywhere in Europe. And that's because we have a much higher private sector involvement.
That's the jobs miracle. No one quite understands what's driving it, but the Tories have been.
But it's private enterprise is driving it. It's not the public sector, it's the private sector.
Alistair in Port Glasgow, thank you so much. Our next question, please.
Yeah, hello. It's Mark from Bunbury in Western Australia. I was just wondering if you can fix the housing crisis by electing Jeremy Corbyn, because as Mr. Iain Duncan Smith, hello, Mr. Smith.
Hello.
Said earlier,
are you actually calling from Australia?
Yeah, I am.
Wow.
It's quite late at night.
Hello, Mark.
But yes, the housing crisis seems quite severe over there in the United Kingdom, and it seems like one of the best ways of fixing that is electing Jeremy Corbyn, and everyone will promptly leave, as seems to be being predicted. I actually, if I was in Britain, if I was living in the United Kingdom, I myself would leave, and you're Mr. Smith, you're more than welcome, and so are you, Mr. Chopper. you're more than welcome to come over.
Mark, it's great to hear from you in Western Australia. Well, what's your question for Iain Duncan Smith? Is it you're warning about a Corbyn victory?
Yes, no, sorry. That was more or less the question. Was that
Okay.
I guess that was right at the start of their conversation.
Well, you guys have had an election quite recently. You guys have had an election quite recently.
Yeah, we had.
And everybody said
We did,
that,
and it was a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone said that Morrison would lose, wouldn't manage to succeed. In fact, he's won the election. And that goes to show that actually when you face people, I think, with a real choice, and the choice is, yeah, you can have all these things that everyone says you have to have, and you can vote for much more government intervention and much more taxation. But when it comes to it, and remember it's you, it's not somebody else that you're voting to have this done to, then do you really want this? And I think that argument resonated enormously with people in Australia, and they realise, actually, what I want is a reasonable government that does its best, but I don't want a government that takes me over, takes me for granted, and charges me more and more money to get things more and more wrong and not do them properly. And that, I think, was the choice, and I think they made that decision.
Mark, did you spend some time living here? Are you familiar with Britain?
I've been there a couple of times. Yeah, I guess that was the distinction I was kind of making was that back when Trump was elected, praise be to the American people for their excellent choice. But when he was elected, there was quite a lot of activists and actresses and so forth, media types basically saying that if Mr. Trump got elected, they would leave the country, and then lo and behold, 2 years later, they've done a list up, and there was 197 who said they'd leave. They're all still there. So what I was basically saying was, if Jeremy Corbyn does get elected, do you actually, in all seriousness, would you actually be expecting people to flee?
Well, I tell you what, I think what would flee almost immediately is capital. I think there's no question in my mind that if Jeremy Corbyn gets within a sniff of taking the reins of power, anybody that's got investments here will seriously start to think about
What will that mean for voters if that happens?
Well, I don't know. The voters may immediately notice it because it'll be, it'll be kind of after the event, as it were. But it will mean that the cost of borrowing will soar under Jeremy Corbyn. It will mean that businesses will not make decisions to invest, to grow, and they'll put everything on hold here while they see just how bad this is going to be, and probably then eventually just set up and go. So I think capital, money, can move overnight, and it will move, and I think Britain will be the worst for that.
But you don't see a big emigration of thousands of people like Mark's suggesting?
Well, I mean, wealthy people, who are really wealthy can go where they like, and that's the point. You want to tax very wealthy people, but very wealthy people are very mobile. They just get up and they move. People like me and others will probably have to stay put and try and put this right. But the point is that those wealthy people he's after, they get fewer and fewer when they pay extra taxes.
Pay more in tax.
You can see that actually when they did the non-DOMs. You remember that was a big row about that, and there's been a non-DOMs process here and allowances for hundreds of years.
Non-domiciled.
Yeah, that's non-domiciled. So, and they were allowed flexibility. Why? Because they mostly brought their money in and invested in the UK. But since we shut that down, they've gone.
There was a number.
They're not here anymore.
There was some work,
they're amongst your wealthy people.
There was some work done by the Cabinet Office, or I think Gus O'Donnell when he was at the Cabinet Office, that said that 48% is the number at which, on income tax, above that number you start encouraging people to leave the country or to avoid. Below that number, you maximise the tax take. I'm not sure whether that was an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that is probably too high. I think the reality is they start making decisions before that. I don't think it's as clear cut as that.
Okay. Well, Mark in Western Australia, what a great treat to hear from you. Thank you so much for calling up. Our next caller, please. Hello.
Hello, I'm Vilas here from London.
Hi, Vilas. You're through to call ideas.
These are warning voters that higher government borrowings will increase their home mortgage costs.
So there's a fear there on higher mortgages if the capital flight takes.
Yeah, no, I agree with the caller. He's right. The key point is, and this is the point I was just trying to make with the last caller, was that the real problem that we face is that those who have money invested here will see this as a bad return in the UK. Once taxes start to soar, which they will have to do, once he sees businesses as a conspiracy that needs to be taxed. So corporation tax is going to go back up. And when we lowered corporation tax, we saw a lot more businesses come and settle themselves here in the UK. And that meant more tax overall, and it also meant more employment. And it's quite interesting, when we lowered the upper rate of tax, not by much, by 5%, what actually happened was that the take of taxation from corporation tax rose. It didn't go down. It rose as we brought the level down. So there is the old Laffer curve concept, which is the more you tax, the less you get. And this is a concept that Labour simply doesn't seem to understand. And that's the balance. We are in a global competitive economy. People have got many, many places that they can go and invest their money. Many businesses outside the UK, they can go and see a good return. The UK right now is a good return. But if Jeremy Corbyn comes in, I can't see of any reason why these businesses will stay put unless they've been here for a generation or something.
Thank you, Vanasco. Our final caller, please. Hello there.
This is Alan from Oxford.
Hi, Alan. You're through to Call IDS. What's your question for Mr. Duncan Smith?
Yes, it's in fact, it's been asked earlier, but I just want to make a point that I've been worried about the Conservative campaign myself because I feel we're in a situation now where the Get Brexit Done statement is a bit tired, like strong and stable. We've had that mess. I think the need is to reverse the strapline and unleash Britain's potential. Needs to get much more of a profile than Get Brexit Done, because I think most of the population now has decided what it's going to do about Brexit. So you're not winning any votes with that. That's a decision made by most of the population already.
So to unleash Britain's potential, will that fit on the bus, Iain Duncan Smith?
Yeah, well, Boris Johnson has been using that. I mean, he's definitely a very, very upbeat about our future, as I am. But you are right. I mean, you've got to have a mixture of the reality, which is get Brexit done. We have to. We can't meander on any longer. It's destroying our companies, investments. People are holding off. And the second bit is unleashing our potential. It's absolutely right, because that's exactly what we will do. Britain, entrepreneurs, all the rest of it will thrive in a country that is now independent of what I think is now a dead blanket on innovation and enterprise in the European Union. And in fact, I think worse is yet to come from the European Union, because I think the euro is now deeply unstable. Germany's heading right on the margins of recession, and most other countries there either haven't grown or mired in debt. So I think there are real problems with the EU and the Eurozone. But what I will say is upbeat messaging is absolutely right. Reagan was the best at upbeat messaging. He had an upbeat message when he first got elected, which is just one of the greatest statements. He said, elect Ronald Reagan, and it's morning in America again. And I think it's a wonderful statement.
On that note, look, thank you so much for calling out. We've had taken about a dozen phone calls. But Iain Duncan Smith, for now, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget, if you want to join in and become a subscriber, go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper, where we'll give you a free 1 month's access to all the Telegraph's best content online. And you'll be notified about any future phone calls with leading politicians. Thanks to my producer, Theo Ludis, and Edith Lampitt, and everyone for listening. Do tune in again for another podcast this week, and always do buy your copy of the Daily Telegraph. It's brilliant. Until next time, cheerio!
Hello listeners, I'm Danny Boyle, just interrupting Chopper to introduce myself. I'm the Telegraph's Commuter Editions editor, which means it's my job to provide you with great journalism that makes your journey to and from work as enjoyable as possible. I can't prevent train delays or guarantee you won't get caught in the rain, but I can make sure you're up to date with the best of the Telegraph every morning and evening. My colleague Chris Price and I produce briefings to bring you up to speed in just 2 minutes at both ends of the day. Now, they're also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search The Briefing or follow the link in the show notes to this episode.